Alana cried loudly into Jeanette's chest as she rubbed her curly head tenderly. She sat Alana down in the chair and instructed her to practice her breathing exercises. Alana did so between sobs and hicks. Daniel stood frozen at the front door, his hands pressed tightly against it, listening to the many incoherent voices outside. They seemed to be whispering and screaming at the same time. Jeanette walked over briskly to check on Jeremy and Alexis. Alexis stood frozen in place, shaking and crying. Jeanette guided her gently to the sectional and sat her down. She instructed Jeremy to get a few glasses of water. Jeremy jumped and then complied as beads of sweat formed on his forehead. His mouth had gone dry. He could neither cry nor speak. Jeanette went over to the blonde young woman and brown-haired young man. She crouched down and inspected them for injuries. The young woman was shaking violently. The young man had tears streaming down his handsome face. "Are you hurt anywhere?" Jeanette asked in a quivering voice. I don't think so." The young woman responded, sobbing loudly. The young man shook his head no. Jeremy handed Alexis a cup of water with a shaking right hand. She accepted it and started taking small sips. "Remember, breathe slowly, in and out, steady yourself. You too." Jeanette reminded Alexis and instructed the young woman who was beginning to hyperventilate. Daniel finally pulled himself from the door. His eyes looked wild, some of his hair laid scruffily on his forehead. He paced back and forth anxiously, grabbing his head. "May I know your names?" Jeanette asked softly. "I'm Sophia." The young woman responded, trying to breathe in and out. "I'm Eric," the young man said, swiping tears from his face. "Daniel, help me get them on the sofa, please," Jeanette asked. Daniel walked over nervously and helped Jeanette lift Sophia from the floor. Eric got up by himself on shaky legs. They walked them over to the sofa and sat them next to Alexis. Jeremy handed them cups of water on a tray. Jeanette forced them to take a few sips to help them calm down a bit. Jeremy sat the tray on the dining table and picked up Alana, who was still crying softly. He hugged her tightly, allowing her to rest her head on his right shoulder. Jeanette sat on the ottoman in front of Sophia and held her hand gently. "Can you tell us what happened?" Sophia let out a heavy breath. "My friends and I run an online channel where we search for supernatural phenomenon across the country. We heard a legend about this town a few years ago that something called the culling happens every 20 years. We didn't have much details but heard some crazy supernatural stuff happens. We wanted to investigate and record some stuff for our channel. We didn't expect this." Sophia started crying hard again. Jeanette gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "What the hell is that? I mean, what was that out there?" Daniel finally spoke. "We don't know either. It attacked us in our RV. We tried driving away, but it blew out our tires. It grabbed my friend Melissa first, but she got away initially. Now both her and Jake are gone." Eric responded grievously. "We tried knocking on others' doors for help, but no one would help us." Sophia said through sobs. "It's okay, you're safe now," Jeanette said, feeling unsure. "Eric, help me. Please open the door." A feminine voice yelled out from outside the door. Eric and Sophia jumped up from the sofa and stared at the front door, eyes wide. "Melissa?" Eric screamed. "Eric, I'm scared. Please help me. Open the door." "Melissa!" Eric cried out, running towards the door. Daniel grabbed him harshly by the arm, snatching him back. "Is Melissa the young woman that was grabbed out there?" Daniel asked sternly. "Let me go," Eric demanded. "Yes, that was Melissa," Sophia responded, shocked. "Melissa is dead. We all saw it." "You won't open that door," Daniel said, grabbing Eric's arm harder. But don't you hear her too?" Eric asked, looking towards the door. Alexis and Jeanette both stood up and stared towards the door in fear. "That's not Melissa," Jeanette said, shivering. "Please, help me. Open the door." The voice rang out louder. A loud knocking started, vibrating the whole wall. Alexis screamed as she looked wide-eyed at the kitchen doors, causing everyone else to turn that way. The translucent entity slowly crept up the glass doors, waving its tendrils like hundreds of cobras, swaying to the vibrations of the pungi as it climbed higher and higher. Jeremy hid Alana's face and instructed her to cover her ears as the many voices grew louder and louder. "Open the door!" Many voices screamed. "Open the door!" Everyone covered their ears. "Open the door! Eric, please, I need help. Open the door!" Melissa's desperate voice returned, pleading as the doors shook violently. Why is this happening? Sophia yelled out with her hands pinned tightly to the sides of her head. I'm hurt, help me! Open the door! It was now Jake's voice that pleaded desperately. Jeremy sat in the corner with Alana between the dining table and counter. He held her tightly while she cried, her small hands covering her ears. He began singing her favorite song loudly in an attempt to drown out the voices. Jeanette grabbed Alexis and sat back down on the sofa. She held her, leaning her head on her shoulder. Daniel looked out of the glass kitchen doors furiously. He let go of Eric's arm and ran upstairs, taking 2 steps at a time. What are you doing? Jeanette yelled, but no response. The voices continued their demand, sometimes in unison, sometimes in the voice of Melissa or Jake. Sophia ran to Eric and pulled him away from the door and made him sit back on the sofa. She lifted his hands to his ears and covered them. He closed his eyes as tears streamed down his cheeks. Daniel returned after a few minutes, sweating heavily and nearly falling down the stairs. In his hands he held a king-size bed sheet, a hammer and a box of nails. Help me with this, somebody, Daniel demanded as he ran towards the kitchen doors. Jeremy stood up slowly. Still holding Alana, he walked over and sat her on Alexis's lap. Alana wrapped around Alexis like a baby koala. Jeremy ran to Daniel. He tried to ignore the entity as their presence at the door made it swerve and rattle violently. Standing on the top of his toes, he held the sheet in place over the door, while Daniel nailed it in place, creating a covering. The entity let out a deafening shriek, causing Daniel to drop the hammer and grab his ears. Everyone held their ears tightly as Alana screamed to the top of her lungs. Jeanette grabbed Alana's face and mouth to her to breathe in and out. Alana looked into her mom's eyes and started her breathing exercises between hicks and sobs. Alexis' hands were pinned so tightly to her ears that her face and palms had become red. Sophia held her ears. Her pretty face was hidden by her curls that were tossed wildly across her head as she rocked vigorously back and forth. Jeremy ran from the door, his hands pinned tightly to the sides of his face, and joined his sister on the sofa. Daniel crouched down, holding his ears tightly. Jeanette winced in pain from the noise as she continued to instruct Alana to breathe. The doors shook violently, the voices screaming incoherently and boisterously. Open the door, a deep and inhuman voice screamed out demandingly, and then suddenly there was silence. Don't open the door. Tomma 3. By Ella Morris.